Good morning. It's good to see you this morning and to be back and feeling up to talking about the scriptures. Everything went really well this weekend, and sorry about my voice. And I'm just happy to feel a little bit sparky this morning. And Heather decided to come out and play. So we're up to the 4th chapter of the book of Romans. And Paul is very much he is a philosopher, and he is a speaker, and he has been probably for the last 5 years been convincing people and Jewish folks that God has done a new thing, opened wide relationship with God through faith. And so he really puts that all into this book of Romans. And one of the reasons that it's so rich and wonderful is that he has thought about this, and he's needed to talk with people about this for a while in his life. So right now he's very much addressing Jewish folks, and he was in the last chapter. This chapter he will be talking about Abraham, because Abraham, as we read in the book of Genesis, I'm not quite as clear as I want to be. Genesis, he is very much the founder of the faith, and he is the one who began relationship in God. Again, Genesis 12 is where all of that begins. And so he uses that initial relationship with Abraham, that God made with Abraham, to again make his point that this is a relationship based on trust and faith and not based on the law, by using someone who the Jews admired above all else, Abraham. And Abraham was seen as flawless in their eyes because he was the one that God initially spoke to, created relationship with, that created the Jewish folk, that created the house of Israel. Again, Israel is another name for folks who are Jewish, and that has to do with the relationship that was built with Jacob. Yeah. Anyway, so let's just read. Beginning chapter 4, verse 1. So how do we fit what we know about Abraham, our first father of faith, into this new way of looking at things? If Abraham, by what he did for God, got God to approve him, he could certainly have taken credit for it. But the story we're given is a God story, not an Abraham story. What we read in scriptures is Abraham entered into what God was doing for him, and that was the turning point. He trusted God to set him right instead of being right on his own. If you're a hard worker and do a good job, you deserve the pay. We don't call your wages a gift. But if you see that job is too big for you, that it is something only God can do, and you trust him to do it, you could never do it for yourself, no matter how hard or how long you worked. Well, that trusting in him to do it is what gets you set right with God, by God. Sheer gift. David confirms this by looking at it and saying that the one who trusts God to do the putting everything right without insisting on having a say in it is one fortunate man. Fortunate those whose crimes were whisked away, whose sins were wiped clean from the slate. Fortunate the person against whom God does not keep score. Do you think for a minute that this blessing is only pronounced over those of us who keep our religious ways and are circumcised? Or do you think it's possible that the blessing could be given to those who never even heard of our ways, who were never brought up in the disciplines of God? We all agree, don't we, that it was by God embracing what God did for us. We all agree, don't we, that it was by embracing what God did for him that Abraham was declared fit before God. Now think, was that declaration made before or after he was marked by the covenant rite of circumcision? That's right. It was before he was marked. That means that he underwent circumcision as evidence and confirmation of what God had done long before to bring him into an acceptable standing with himself. An act of God he had embraced with his whole life. And it further means that Abraham is the father of all people who embrace what God does for them while they're still on the outs with God, as yet unidentified as God's, in an uncircumcised condition. It is precisely these people in this condition who are set right with God, by God with God. Abraham is also, of course, father of those who have undergone the religious rite of circumcision, not just because of the ritual, but because they are willing to live in the risky faith embrace of God's action for them. And by the way that God lives long before they were marked by circumcision. I think I'm going to stop there because I am, hey, Debbie, I am just a little bit, and I think it's enough to be getting on with. So, again, Paul is making the argument and has made the argument all the way through the book of Romans so far, that we are all called by God, all set right by God, that everyone is a child of God and God desires relationship with all of them. And of course, in the time which he's speaking, Jewish folk believe it's only for them. And as a good Jewish folk, any male of a Jewish family would have been circumcised, that is, the foreskin of his penis removed, we know this, on the 8th day. And Paul is, very clearly saying this, that for folks who are Jewish, and I kind of put myself in that mindset and just imagine their outrage at hearing this from Paul, because circumcision was the center of the sign that God approved of them, that they were in right relationship with God, that they were God's people. And he's saying, yeah, I know that you think that's a big deal, but in fact, the founder of our faith, the one who was set right by God first, wasn't circumcised. He wasn't circumcised when that happened, and he wasn't circumcised until about 8 or 9 years later, when God desired to give a sign for the people to set them apart from others in their world that worshipped other gods. It reminds me of a story, a joke. Someone's trying to present an understanding of who Jesus Christ is, and so it's a speaker, and he's saying, well, of course, Jesus kept all the Jewish laws because he was Jewish. And a good, I think the story is told that it was Catholic, a good Catholic woman stands up and says, that's ridiculous. Jewish or Christian, Emma, Jesus was a Christian. He goes, no, we have it on good authority from the scripture that Jesus was a Jew. And so another woman stands up and yells, well, the Blessed Mary, mother of Jesus, was Catholic. So we all want, and of course that's where these folks were. Abraham was our forebearer, so of course he was circumcised. And Paul is saying no. Circumcision was not a condition of faith. As a matter of fact, it came later because God gave him a sign of being God's person. And so people who were entering this faith relationship that was created by Abraham being set right by God, that therefore all people who are set right by God are in relationship with God, and it is all God's doing. Again, people in that generation, people in this generation, we get confused. We act as though it is our right behavior or our willingness to go to church or our willingness to follow certain rules or our ability to be heterosexual that makes us right with God. And in fact, it is God setting us right with God. It is all God's work. It is just us giving thanks and being grateful for the work that God has done. And so, again, Paul being an incredibly intelligent person, Paul being someone who understood how to get to the folks that he was speaking to, used a center pillar of the faith. Look, Abraham. You know Abraham, and they're, oh yeah, Abraham was our father. Abraham is the one who, created and began our community of faith. And he goes, yeah, he did. And it wasn't anything he did. It was all on God. God was the one who chose him. God was the one who reached out to him. God was the one who put him in right relationship. And we don't often read this section of the scripture in church, at least not that I've ever done. But one of the things I like about Paul's ability to put things in perspective for us is verses like 4 and 5 that says, if you're a hard worker and do a good job, you deserve pay. You don't call your wages a gift. But if you see a job that's too big for you, that it's something only God can do, and you trust him to do it, you can never do it for yourself, no matter how hard or how long you worked. Well, the trusting to him to do it is what gets you right with God, by God, sheer gift. And so that's us who are put right by God, with God. I said that backwards, but anyway, who are put right with God, by God, and that's a sheer gift. It's nothing that we've done. We haven't spiffed ourselves up. We haven't done anything except for accept and give thanks that God has called out to us, has made us right with God, and by faith trusted that that is true. I know a lot of preachers, a lot of people who focus on what they've done wrong or what someone else, usually it's what someone else has done wrong, about sin or about brokenness. And believe me, I am convinced that there is brokenness in our world and brokenness in my life. But that's not where my focus is, and that's not where Paul's focus is. Paul's focus is on God, on God's ability to care for that, to heal that, to make us right with God, and in entering into relationship with God and accepting that, find the healing and wholeness for our lives. And so if that's true for us, for those of us who sit in front of a phone and talk to it and say, good morning, everyone who's watching, or those who are out there still struggling even to believe that God exists because I think because we haven't lived a real convincing witness of that, then that means all of us are on the same playing field. All of us are in the same boat. All of us, no matter who we are, no whether we realize what God is doing or we haven't yet, are still the children of God, called by God, made whole by God. And it's the gift, sheer gift, that we have realized that. And sometimes it really wasn't even our doing as much as parents and loved ones who are willing to not only tell us about God in our lives, but show us. So here Paul is saying, look, you have Abraham as your father. You have this great gift of faith and story that tells you about a man who lived long before God was spoken of or talked about to any great degree. And that man, when he encountered the living God, recognized that that was a wonderful, wonderful gift and love and faith to live in. And that it was simply Abraham's willingness to believe and have faith that caused the relationship with God to be fermented in his life, and had nothing to do with the work or the law or circumcision or anything else. Because of course, at the time of Abraham, again, chapter 12 in Genesis, there isn't even circumcision, and there certainly is not the law of Moses that happens in the book of Exodus. So here's Abraham believing. And so Paul uses that example that they all know, that they all understand clearly, to say, see, God made faith relationship when this human being of Abraham trusted and have faith. And of course, Abraham's trust and faith was to pick up sticks and move to where God called him to be, to believe that even in his old age, he could have a child to pass this faith down to do all kinds of things. And again, those stories are in Genesis 12 through probably around 17 or 18. And so Abraham has this vital and living relationship with God, of course, created by God, made the way by God, but in faith had that relationship. And it's that created the people of God, Israel, Jews. And Paul just uses that example to convince them that others can be called in the same way. Again, I'm sure a lot of Jewish folks did not like the idea that Abraham was an example for those outsider Gentiles who were included in God's new grace. And it wasn't new. It was just something we saw through the person of Jesus Christ. So as always, I don't know that I've made any sense at all, but that's okay because I made it here. And yesterday I wasn't quite sure that I would have. And so we've gone through verse 12, I believe. And we'll do the second half of Romans 4 next week. And again, I'm never quite sure because Thursday is my treatment day. But we'll trust God, we'll believe, and I'll get to it when I can get to it. Thank you guys for watching. It's good to see you on my little screen, and blessings and peace be with you.